But yeah, so just to say, yeah, so the whole purpose of today is really to look at it from that aspect. So we've just got a few business items to go through, but before we formally start the meeting, I would like to take this opportunity for us as a commission to pay tribute and our respects to George Floyd, who's moved the hearts of so many across the world. What's happened in the world over the past couple of weeks has been extremely disturbing for people like myself of ethnic minority background to have to witness. And I'd like to move to say that we have a 1 minute silence to pay our tribute and respects to the family and to the loved ones of George Floyd. Thank you all for your patience, and thank you all for observing the 1 minute silence. As I've said, as a commission, we stand by well, personally, honestly, as a councillor of
universities, very large businesses and very small businesses. So probably quite a good reflection of the impact of the London economy that I'm just about to take you through. So if I speak on behalf of Here East, first of all, just to give you a general summary of the impact to date, and then I'll speak on behalf of Plexel as they are sister companies. So within Here East, we pretty much have moved to a site which is predominantly remote working. So particularly the universities, as many will know across London and beyond, universities moved to online mode. There's about 1,000 registered students within Loughborough University, about 600 registered students within UCL, and then we've probably got about 100 within Staffordshire University, and none of those are present on site at the moment. Big concern for the universities, as goes without saying, everything from a one-person organisation through to groups of teams from large organisations who want to work in that type of environment. We principally do three things. So we house and accommodate those businesses. We have an event program which is relevant to those businesses, and then thirdly, we run a consulting team which typically focuses on government initiatives where they're looking at technology and change. From the co-working businesses, so we've lost probably about 20% of our customers either through administration or maybe 50 people, assuming no second wave. But I think more importantly, much more collaboration to come out the other side of this, which would be welcome and would help us significantly. So obviously not a fantastic time for Plexor here East, but we're long-term stakeholders in both the legacy program, both the social regeneration promised out the back of 2012. So we've got absolute shareholder confidence, despite some of the financial setbacks that we've got. And there's three things I think in particular, which I'd just like to raise on this call, either for onward communication after this call, or maybe debate if it's relevant. But the to be launched on Friday discretionary grant fund. So this was a fund which we very much welcome from central government, that effectively filled the gap of the small business rates relief fund that was launched. But this is for the companies that don't directly pay business rates. So the kind of gap, particularly in our case, of people in shared workspaces, but there's also people in bed and breakfasts and other types of businesses that would apply for it. Now, I think and we welcome actually all the effort and focus that Hackney Council has had on this. One particular challenge now that we've seen the application requirements is that a business is ineligible to apply unless their property costs are greater than 30% of their turnover. Now, sadly, that's just not the way that co-working works. So people take on very small chunks of property relative to the size of their business. And to be frank, if they took on something that was worth 30% of their turnover, they'd have made a very poor decision. And we would counsel them against that. So I'm very sad to say that I don't think, I think extremely few of the Plexor community will be able to apply for those grants. And I'm just very sad to say that they will lose out from that grant opportunity insofar as it's available to anyone. I have raised this separately with Ian Williams, so I'm hoping for a response from Ian just to advise as to whether that relative proportion of the eligibility criteria is up for debate or not. But that's one big concern I've got. The second point, just relative to transport on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. So those of you who've listened to me bore on for a while, you've probably heard me talk about the oasis of serenity that an Olympic Park is. So it's quite a lovely place to wander around for lots of reasons, but principally because there isn't a lot of transport going around the park. We are going to get caught short as a result of this in the next 6 to 12 months. So the biggest challenge over the last 8 years or so, convincing people to come to our site, has been getting there. And it's fantastic links to get to Stratford, to get to Hackney Wick. There's a reasonable bus network thereafter. The effect of social distancing on that last mile to get to site is going to be terminal for us unless we can find another answer. We are working with the LLDC at the moment, and I'm assured that a communication will have gone into Hackney Council and to Newham around the potential to work on the recently announced e-scooter scheme from Department for Transport. So what we'd like to do is agree with both Newham and Hackney a routing that allows people to get between the main public transport networks, both bus, rail and tube, in order for them to be able to get to here East and Plexor. So obviously lots more news and hopefully collaboration to come on that front. And then the final comment, and it's an appeal for the future rather than any direct comment, but we're very conscious the retail businesses that exist at here East, predominantly the leisure and hospitality offerings, particularly on Canal side, but also elsewhere on the scheme. And we're conscious their obligations as those businesses are able to reopen, as the government advice continues, that they may need some flexibility on the licensing regulations, in particular extensions of their ability to operate outside. So in particular the area at Canal side, which I'm sure lots of you are familiar with, so the area facing Hackney Wick by the River Lee. There is a proposal in with a licensing committee around at the moment around allowing some of those businesses the flexibility to be able to go beyond their licensed area, still within very direct reach of their facilities. But it'd be good to just understand that the licensing committees are geared up for what will be, surely a large amount of requests coming in, and we're conscious we'll play our position in the queue. But we'd love to know that there was some support there of the local businesses. Now, All that said, so obviously don't want this to be all doom and gloom. I would like to reiterate the backing that we've had from our shareholders during this period. So particularly for Plexel, this is probably going to cost us about £2 million in terms of lost income, and therefore shareholder funds that we're going to need to draw down upon. This is a long-term business, as is Here East, and we're committed, to the, at least the decade that follows this. So, albeit a blip on our plans, we're here to stay, and we're here for the local businesses as well. So we're very conscious there's a lot of businesses in distress here. So we're doing absolutely anything we possibly can in order to support them, and we'll continue to do so. So if that message can get out there within our own networks that we are here to help, and anything we can do, we will.
Thank you, Andrew. This is really bad of me as the chair, but I should have actually declared an interest, although the item is not about Plexel and Here East itself. I run a charity which is based at Plexel, but of course you're only sort of like providing account to what some of the challenges that you may be faced. So that's my Tim, that's for you for the minutes. Right, so what we're going to do is we're going to just quickly whiz through all of the questions, if that's okay with the commission members, just to get a quick account and really to understand, what have been some of the real challenges for you during this sort of process, and how has your business has been impacted. As I said, we've got a diverse range of businesses from different industries that we're going to be hearing from. So if I can go to Daniel Maher next, who's the Managing Director of Boulevard Events.
Yeah, hi.
Thank you, Daniel. And if you could just be mindful of time, but of course use enough time you need to make your point.
Yeah, thank you. Apologies, I was a little bit late joining. I had some difficulties. My name's Daniel. I'm the Managing Director of Boulevard Events. We are an event caterer based in Hackney Wick. We are a second generation family business of just over 30 years, and we started as my parents' restaurant in Victoria Park, and I believe they were the first restaurant in that area, so quite legacy in Hackney. Our business generally is made up of non-concession events, I suppose, so it could be weddings, awards dinners, conferences. We do a lot of sporting hospitality in various sites in the Olympic Park and further afield. But predominantly London based. I'll cut to the chase of our story with COVID-19 really. We began seeing events cancel on us in the first week of March, so a good 10 days prior to any lockdown measures and before any World Health Organization recommendation for public events or events of mass gatherings not to take place were made. Typically our events range from 100 to 200 people, but it can be up to 2,000. So since obviously lockdown, and as I mentioned prior to that, we've had no events whatsoever. So that's, I suppose, 100% of our sort of usual turnover disappeared. We have started a local meal delivery service, which runs to people's homes, and they can order for a couple of days worth of food and things like that, pre-prepared meals, which has we've managed to gather about 5% back on turnover, but it doesn't really cover much. In fact, it doesn't even cover the wages of the people that aren't furloughed in order to operate. But it does allow us to stay engaged with our business and the local community in some way. So that's a positive. I suppose our greater challenge really is not just we have a benefit of being a reasonably strong cash business in that people tend to pay deposits. So particularly for weddings and things, they'll pay a fairly 50% deposit, which is retained. But we can't really have great confidence in using that money to operate at the moment, because despite contracts, those are likely to be frustrated if people choose not to postpone their events, but cancel them, even though with contracts, I'm sure some of you have seen in the news that really they don't stand. And therefore they're frustrated, and people can claim back their deposits if they choose to do so. And there's none of our insurances cover any of that. So our bigger challenge is, as lockdown measures are released and people are able to return to pubs and things like that, which we can't wait for, that probably won't filter down into the events industry for a number of months. Global massive global brands that are clients of ours, like Google, Facebook, and a lot of the big tech companies have announced that they won't be doing any events until May, June at the earliest next year. So that's a considerable amount of time, obviously, for us to be able to hang on. We have launched some other brands on platforms like Deliveroo, but it's not an area that we're very experienced in, and so far hasn't been very successful, but we'll keep persevering with that. We have managed to access some support measures. 13 of our 15 staff are furloughed, but all of the hospitality grants and rate relief packages that were announced, we're not eligible for, because the criteria, the way that they're paid is based on how the building that you operate from is rated, and our building isn't open to the public. We've a prep kitchen and offices, but the events we do take place on other premises. So the event spaces that we work in will receive those grants, but we as effectively a supplier to those events don't receive any of those grants, which was a blow, because we initially obviously expected to be, as we consider ourselves very much a hospitality business. We have, however, had a rent-free period granted to us. We're a subtenant of Hackney Council. Our building's owned by Hackney Council. It's operated by Arbite, who is a workspace provider, and we're a tenant of that. So we have had a 3-month rent-free period, which is gratefully received, and we're hopeful that we might be able to look at further measures for the next 3 months. But as things stand, that's kind of the extent of the support we've received. And I guess our next step will be loans, but then the uncertainty around being able to pay those back will obviously be a challenge. I think, as Andrew mentioned, there's this discretionary fund that's being announced and comes into play on Friday. But the same criteria that he highlighted of rent or property-based costs being 30% of your turnover, for us wouldn't be the same either. And for the same reasons, I don't think anybody in our industry would be able to sustain those kind of levels of cost. So if those criteria are set in stone, I suppose, then I don't expect that we'll get any of those discretionary grants either.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Is there anything further you'd like to add? Or did I just cut you off by accident?
No, I'd missed the beginning. So if I've missed anything, then that was all I was going to say. Please let me know.
I mean, it's great for us to hear from you. Particularly, obviously, we're very, our heart goes out to you during this difficult time, and obviously, we understand the impact on your business as well. And that's the purpose of this meeting today for us as councillors. And we've got Guy Nicholson here, who's a cabinet member and responsible as well. We've got officers here as well. What we really want to do is understand how COVID-19 has impacted you, and hopefully, on the back of this, we want to try to build on some of the good work that the council is doing to really support businesses like you. So I'm sure commission members will have lots of questions for you to follow up with. I want to go next to Joe from the Hackney Empire. Joe, have we got you on board?
Is that it? Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Hi, everybody. Just to kick off where you ended, Messi, just to say how supported we absolutely feel by the culture team and people like Petra Roberts and Guy in this awful time for theatre. We do feel like we've got real allies there that are with us every step of the way, and just simple things like Mayor Glanville becoming a friend of Hackney Empire and tweeting that has actually made quite a difference to our Friends membership scheme. So those sorts of small public tweets are very, very positive for us at this terrible time, because we closed on the 16th of March, and we do receive funding from the Arts Council, but that's about 12% of our turnover. So we have to earn or raise 88% of our turnover. And obviously we sell tickets, and we hire out the space to people who give us money, and we can't do that at all at the moment. And I think theatre and the arts generally, I think the feeling is that we're going to be the sort of last to come back. There's no talk at all at the moment about how that might happen, and economically, social distancing would be very hard to contemplate. We don't know how you would make a 1,200 seat theatre work with social distancing. But that's if we could reopen, we'd open in an instant and make it work. My colleague and I, Yamin Chowdhury, who's the artistic director, we took over in 2018 and have spent the last 2 years with a lot of help from Guy and Petra and the team, stabilising the organisation. And we were just about to open the new financial year in the healthiest position that Hackney Empire's been in for a long time, and that's sort of hard. But everybody's been hit very hard. But I suppose that on a day-to-day basis, the thing that we're focusing on is our work with young people, and all of that has shifted to online. So we're still maintaining the Creative Futures and Creative Learning programs, but all of it has shifted to online. And as Yamin, who I mentioned, is a genius entrepreneur and maker of things to happen. So he's adapted all our programs, and we're still continuing that work. We've also, if anybody's been in Hackney, they'll see that the cafe is closed. So we're sort of, our public face is totally gone at the moment, apart from online, which is obviously important. I don't know, where we could maybe use some support, I think, again, is around the licensing stuff. So, the late night levy, we're paying 2 licenses, one for the theatre, one for the cafe, outdoor furniture licenses. So if there's any sort of holiday or waiver on any of that sort of stuff, that would really help us, because we've taken advantage of everything that we can in terms of furloughing, but we were a small staff team anyway, and as part of the stabilisation, we'd cut everything that we possibly could. So we don't have anything else left to cut. And I suppose what we're focused on is making sure that fantastic, iconic building survives for this generation and for the local people that we employ, and the work that we do that is representative and is even more important at this time at the moment. That's it.
Thank you very much, Jo. And again, I think I'm sure I can speak on behalf of. Firstly, I'm really happy to hear that the culture team have been extremely supportive of the Empire, and I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the commission members to say that you've certainly got our support, and hopefully the Empire won't be going anywhere soon with us behind you. Thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll have lots of follow-up questions for that. I'm just a bit mindful of time, and I want to make sure that we've got a really meaty section for questions. We're joined also by Dominic Goody as well, who's the head of international trade for the Food and Drink Federation. Dominic, I know you're very, very busy, especially during this time, because I know, as well as everything that's happening with COVID, you also got your hats in the sort of the Brexit talks as well. And I thought it would be really interesting to invite you to this meeting, because obviously you'll be doing a lot of work around the supply of particularly in those industries, but also about the Brexit negotiations and how that's progressing as well, because ultimately that will have an impact on our economy as well. So it'd be good for you to sort of just maybe in a couple of minutes to kind of give us your insights.
Thank you for inviting me to join you today as well. So in short, I work for the Food and Drink Federation. We're a trade body representing manufacturers of food and drink. We're the biggest one in the UK, but there are probably another 150 like us, representing every product category and type you could dream of. We work in very close partnership with a lot of them, and we put together a group that's been meeting twice a week for the last 4 months, I think now, in response to coronavirus, representing about 70 or 80% of all the businesses in what is the UK's largest manufacturing sector, but also working with the hospitality industry as a key partner and key customer of ours. I think the work we've done has focused on 2 areas. Firstly, the workers themselves, because we're one of 2 industries alongside the pharmaceutical sector that's actually kept going to some degree during this crisis. But we have 500,000 workers who are deeply concerned. It's a very anxious time for them, and making sure they're safe to carry on working. So we've had a lot of colleagues have been working to help make sure factories are safe environments for people to work in, and they can go in with confidence to make sure that consumers and shoppers still can access the food that they need. We had a seismic shift overnight that 30% of food that was eaten out of home was transferred into supermarkets, and this led to some very short-term disruption that has been quickly filled in supermarkets. But the longer-term challenge is that piece that Daniel described very clearly, that reopening the hospitality industry is absolutely critical to what we do. So whereas some of our companies are doing quite well in terms of orders and selling more in supermarkets, it's hit their profitability level enormously because they make a lot of their money in a low margin industry through the hospitality trade. So the reopening of hospitality is in the best interests of the whole food and drink supply chain. To make sure that can happen, I think there's a number of actions that have happened so far, some of which are helpful, some have come too late, and we've been calling for 2 months or more for the government to step in and provide confidence in the insurance industry to make sure that businesses can carry on providing to their suppliers with insurance cover that they would typically sometimes have. But some of the insurance industry has been withdrawing that cover for hospitality businesses that have kept going in some shape or form. And in some cases, they've withdrawn cover for what are probably the biggest and the most, it's food companies that are on every high street, really huge chains, and the insurance industry has just walked away from it. The government stepped in last week and has introduced a measure which we hope will be a big help for them, but clearly there's still a lot to do. And there's one thing, getting through this to the point where businesses can start to reopen in the weeks ahead, but actually doing that is going to be exceptionally tough. And it's down to government and people like myself and the organisations we work with to help businesses as much as we possibly can. So we and a lot of our partners have been listed on government websites as organisations that anyone can come to, not just our own members, and we will do everything we can to help people get the advice they need, to understand what is available in terms of grant funding, the loan schemes, which a lot of businesses are very, very reluctant to take loans out when they have no certainty on what business will look like in 3 months, let alone a year's time, when payments have to start being made on things like bounce back loans. At the same time, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, the whole Brexit world has reopened, and business as normal has started in government circles, which has dragged me away from the whole coronavirus response to facilitate a lot of discussions to help inform what the trade negotiations will look like. And that's looking really tough. I think government has been clear that they won't extend the negotiating period, and delivering everything they've said they will do in the timescale they have looks exceptionally tough, if not impossible, for people in the trade world. I think we look at some of the practicalities. So 40% of the food we eat in this country is imported. Lots of the wonderful ingredients that are eaten, a lot of finished products are imported. But to get them into the country, they have to navigate customs systems and border processes, which nobody knows what that looks like. Nobody is trained to deal with it because they don't know what to prepare for. And a lot of those things are going to take months, if not years, to get ready for, but could potentially come into play on the 1st of January. So it's a really tough time for businesses who are just struggling to keep going and look after their staff and keep delivering what they can do in these terribly challenging times, let alone thinking about what's going to be needed on the 1st of January. So it's tough for everyone. I'm not alone facing a particularly challenging time right now, and I think my heart goes out to a lot of the businesses that are just trying to keep going. But I'll stop there. I realise you're pressed for time.
Dominic, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for all the good work that you're doing as well. I guess this might be a good opportunity for us to stop for questions for the commission members to be able to question some of the businesses, to really understand some of the challenges that you face. And then Councillor Nicholson, if it's all right with you, we can come to you after that, just so you would have heard a bit of a snapshot of what some of the businesses are facing, and then we can come to you. Yeah. So do I have any questions? If you raise your hand, I should be able to see. If not, you can also put it on the chat function as well. So, yeah, commission members, do you have any questions? Councillor Billington, Councillor Race. Oh, sorry, Councillor Palace, if you can please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for this, and as kind of just echoing what Councillor Coburn is saying, kind of our sympathies in this very, very unprecedented time and challenging time. It's just a question for Joe, particularly about theatres and the cultural sector. I don't know whether you recently saw the article from Sam Mendes in the Financial Times about a kind of proposal kind of going forward about how the government could support theatres kind of going forward, kind of becoming almost a kind of shareholder in kind of productions, and then the Arts Council kind of receiving a kind of a proportion of kind of the profits kind of that would be made for kind of taking a stake in kind of organisations. I was just wondering your thoughts on that. And then the other thing that I just wanted to ask you about is, in terms of your Arts Council funding, which is at 12%, is the majority of that going kind of towards your work with young people? And I was just wondering whether the work you're currently doing with young people, is that funded through that, or is that funded through kind of other pots of funding?
Thank you. So just before you, I just want to see if I can get a couple of. Actually, no. You know what? Go on ahead and answer.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of questions there. Yeah, so the Arts Council funding is unrestricted, so we can use it towards the running costs of the organisation. But it's our total public investment that is around about 12% of turnover, not just Arts Council. So that would include the money that we get from LBH for the a service level agreement to do the work with young people, and that sort of answers half of that question. The other way that we support the work with young people, which is over 4,000 young people a year, it's all free. It's a free service to those young people, and it's we fundraise for it. So Esme Fairburn, for example, have give us a grant. We've got a 5-year grant from them, and one of the things that we've done is spoken to everybody that funds us and asked if we can repurpose their grants to sort of put into general usage, as long as it doesn't, go against the basic principles of what they're funding us for. And actually, everyone that we've received funding for has said that we can do that. So that's been really helpful at this time. The Sam Mendes stuff, yeah, I have seen it, and we're a member of the UK Theatres body, and there's a cultural renewal task force that's been set up to look at that sort of thing, the sort of investment for future years. But Hackney Empire is quite different from a lot of the theatres that are involved in that. So a lot of those theatres have a sort of public investment or subsidy level from the Arts Council, which is more like 70 or 80%. So they, if you like, have a different model, so that they could, at this time, a lot of theatres are sort of just not commissioning work and not producing work. But we aren't yet in that place. I mean, we co-produce or we co-present work. We've just started to do that in the last 18 months, but we're not in a place yet where we have the luxury, I guess, of creating work from scratch, apart from the pantomime. So the model that Sam Mendes is putting forward is great, but it doesn't necessarily help us, because we're not yet at the stage where we can make a piece of work. We don't have the funds to be able to make an entire production. We would have to co-produce it with someone. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. I was just wondering, is there a model out there which you think could potentially kind of work, or are there alternatives to that model being put forward?
So we're in dialogue with lots of different organisations like the Roundhouse, which is fairly similar to us, although they have a much healthier starting point, I guess. So there's lots of conversations going on about alternative ways, rather than they're just always being a response to the big companies that are very prestigious and have a very particular kind of audience. We're trying to make sure that the voice of Hackney Empire and those organisations that perhaps have a bigger community representation are also at the table. And Yamin, our artistic director, is absolutely central to a lot of those discussions that are happening. There's also pressure to increase the theatre tax relief fund. So there's a lot of lobbying going on, but I think we are having to make some very, very hard decisions at the moment, with the furlough scheme finishing in October and absolutely no indication that that's going to be extended. We're having to make some very hard choices.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think just on the furlough scheme, I may happy to stand corrected, but my understanding is that it's not going to be extended beyond October.
That's what we understand. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Rishi Sunak announced that. So I've got a couple of questions now. They're all coming at once. So I'm going to go for what I've seen is Councillor Lufkin, then Councillor Race, then Councillor Billington. So if we could, and Councillor Smythe as well. So what I'm going to ask is if commission members, if we could take 3 questions at a time, and then Councillor Smythe, I'll come to you in the next round. So Councillor Lufkin. Richard, you're on mute. Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Race by the time we reconnect to Councillor Lufkin.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just a quick one from me, and I suppose it's a general question for any of the businesses or institutions that are here and whoever wants to pick it up, I suppose. But I'd be interested in knowing what the balance is between businesses and organisations needing just more money to get through. So for restaurants, theatres, we know that this is going to be a very slow recovery. So is it a case of just more national funding is needed to keep you going until we can return to some sort of normal, or is there or counter to that, or alongside that, I suppose, is a question around what more can local authorities and national government do around loosening regulations, or kind of helping you to change the way that you do things. So thinking, for example, can we close down more streets in Shoreditch, for example, if possible, for restaurants to at least take advantage of the Great British Summer and kind of serve food outside more easily, for example, in a social distance way. So what I suppose, comments on more money versus and/or kind of changes in regulations and what they might look like that would make it easier for you all to kind of adapt.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe we've got Councillor Lufkin now. Councillor Lufkin, if you could just unmute your microphone.
Hi there. Yes. Thanks. My message is my questions to Andrew. Yeah, thanks a lot. We've the Commission and its previous iteration as well used to coming to Here East, and so we really do know all about how you do and the cooperation that we've had between the council and Here East. My question was particularly on transport. How are your staff, when you sort of reopen, how are your staff going to get there? I mean, we've seen there's likely to be a fairly substantial reduction in capacity on public transport. I think each individual tube carriage goes from about 120 passengers to about 25, and so that's a 70 to 80% reduction. How are you envisaging your staff get there? And also on the idea of electric scooters, I understand that the government is now doing a trial to allow electric scooters on the public highway, but they still require, people to have a driving license. I mean, would you be envisaging sort of setting up hire scheme or something like that to be able to do it? How would you see that working? Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lufkin, and then Councillor Billington, please.
Mine was specifically, it follows on from Councillor Race's question about what kind of support have any of the businesses that are making representations this evening had from government, either local or national, to enable them to transform their business model, bearing in mind this looks like this is an ongoing, this is could be happening for a long time, so there's no return to normal. I'm particularly struck by Joe's point about the fact there's a 1,200 seat theatre. There's no obvious way of redoing your business model with that particular asset. What kind of support have you had from local and national government, and what kind of support would you like to have in order to be able to enable you to rethink your business model? I've noticed the entrepreneurialism of Boulevard, but that's still not enough at the moment. What kind of support have you got, and what do you need?
Thank you very much. Do you know what? Because of time, I'm going to take Councillor Smythe's question as well, and then we're going to go to Councillor Nicholson. So, Councillor Smythe.
Yes, thank you for that, Chair. Yeah, I kind of wanted to ask about the support, what more we can do, but that question's been asked already. But ultimately, there's various businesses that have been seriously affected by this, and we know that leisure and hospitality and retail are one of those, but there are other sort of growth areas, and I suppose it's a question to Here East and also to the theatre in terms of diversification. And I'm sure you've obviously thought about all this already, but we know that there are areas that are growing in the economy at the moment: healthcare, nursing, social work, teaching, and warehouse. So Here East, I'm thinking warehouse, and I know that you've got the food depot down there that's providing food for Hackney residents. Is there anything more you could do with some of the space down there in Here East, possibly? And to the theatre, I did hear, I'm just thinking of kind of like sort of pragmatic solutions. I heard of a football club that basically allowed children to come in to do teaching at a social distance somewhere in the country. I can't remember where it was, at Southampton or somewhere like that. So they were actually coming into the stadium and sitting kind of 2 or 3 seats apart. I'm just throwing this idea in there that the theatre could be used for something like that. That's just a few ideas that sprung to mind.
Thank you, Councillor Smythe. And it's important, though, that as you suggested, that we do think about how we better use our spaces. And that's the purpose of today's meeting. I'm sure there'll be lots of ideas that will develop as we get on. So we've got a couple of questions. So if I could start with maybe Andrew, do you want to answer to the specific questions to yourself?
Yeah, sure, Mete. So if I answer the transport one straight away as it was directly to us. So there are a number of options from getting from the main public transport infrastructure. I'll answer that, and then we'll go into private transport. So clearly, if one can find themselves to Stratford, either by foot, bike, car, or otherwise, you've got the 388 bus, which is, as I understand it, has got 5 buses an hour now, in between Stratford and Here East. So on a socially distanced bus, I'd imagine a double decker would probably get about 20 people on it. So we can get about 100 people an hour if we dedicated those buses to Here East. We have 4,500 people on campus at max capacity at the moment, so clearly that's not a viable solution, all told. In the summer months, we're lucky. The timing of this, if I could use the word lucky, clearly a walk across the park for those that are physically able to do so, that's a good option. We're also encouraging and doing a bit of an education exercise around the location of Hackney Wick, as a approximate answer to get to the site. Now, clearly, government advice at the moment is to avoid public transport if you possibly can. The multi-storey car park next to Here East, so we've worked with LLDC effectively to free up a floor in that car park for short-term rentals. So if people want to reserve a parking space, they can. There's also a pay-as-you-go option that's prior to the coronavirus has been opened up as an option on the first floor. So for those that are able to drive to site, we'll make that possible. We've got extensive capacity for bike with things like shower secure storage, that type of facility. So we probably could store just shy of about 600 bikes on site. So again, a good possibility. And then the scooter idea. So Department for Transport's guidance at the moment is it has to be an operated hire scheme. So some of the more notable providers of those things, the likes of Bird, Voi, Tier, and others, who no doubt will be swarming around several local authorities to look at optionality as to how they could provide services we're talking to as well. It's not within our gift to be able to put that in place. It has to be a local authority generated outcome, which is why I mentioned we're working with LRDC, Hackney and Newham as well, hopefully to create a network around the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park that would allow for that. It is heavily, or would I say heavily regulated? It is regulated, so it does ask for things like driving licenses, for things like motor insurance to be provided as a result of it, because I think there's still some significant questions around the viability and safety of electric scooters, quite rightly. So we'll be working with our partners, including Hackney Borough Council, in order to make sure that is in place should it be approved.
Thank you very, very much. What I'm going to do is I'm going to break up Councillor Racing and Councillor Billington's questions and pose them to both Daniel and to Joe. I know Councillor Billington's question was more specific to Joe. So maybe if I could start from that, and then Daniel, if I can come to you for Councillor Racing's question. So Joe, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I mean, shared resources would be good. Anything that we can come to the council for that you're paying for already. So I'm thinking, for example, Legionnaires tests of the water. At the moment, everything's turned off. We have to pay for the water testing, obviously, when it restarts. You may have someone in the council that does that as part of your service setup. So anything like that we can piggyback on would be fantastic. We are exploring all kinds of alternative business models, as you can imagine. Live streaming, yeah, it sounds great, but it's quite difficult in practice and quite difficult to monetize, to be honest, unless you're Fleabag, of course, which we're not. And then using the space for alternative things. Yes, we are looking at that again for conferencing maybe, or we're in contact with some universities who need to social distance and therefore need bigger spaces. But again, we have to staff it. So it's a double-edged, it has to, we have to be able to make enough money to cover the staff costs, etc. So repurposing the space, we're all up for that if we can find a way to do it. Practically what we are doing is getting on with some of the repairs and maintenance work that we haven't been able to do previously. So yeah, but shared resources would be a good thing, and any kind of leeway there is with, as I said before, with license payments, that would be smashing.
Thank you, Joe. Daniel, can I come to you for Councillor Race's question about what support you receive from government and local? You're on mute, Daniel.
Sorry, yeah, I've been racking my brains, not just since the question, but prior to that, obviously, to think things that beyond financial support that would help us. I mean, we'd effectively be a supplier to somewhere like Hackney Empire. So you can imagine that any challenges they face in terms of social distancing immediately trickle down to us. We work for a lot of spaces that are very similar. So it is difficult, but I mean, I think at some point endorsing social distancing measures that maybe our industry, the events industry, will be creating for itself, packages like that. I think we need to get to. I mean, this is a national issue and probably global issue in terms of testing and to test, track, and trace. I think probably for the events industry to open up in any way, it's going to need to have effective testing, so that potentially you could, if you had a conference or an exhibition or something, that those people could verify that they've been tested and they're free of COVID-19, and that would then trickle down to us as a caterer. I think probably in the short term, financial support is going to be the biggest thing that we need. I suppose the furlough scheme has been beneficial, and it's wonderful that we've been able to keep our staff on. I don't know that as soon as we're having to contribute to any kind of wage support, it would be very difficult for us, even at a very small level, and particularly because we're not talking about expecting to be able to do events again in the next couple of months. It's going to be 6 months off or longer. Possibly a year, so it wouldn't, it's just not sustainable for us. But the flexible, allowing people to work flexibly, so where they can come back part-time and we can pay them for those hours, I think had that been available sooner, that would have been a huge benefit to us. We're kind of playing catch up on that now, so things like the Deliveroo that I mentioned, we could have started a lot sooner, but it made no sense because we couldn't, we would never be able to get the revenues to afford to cover somebody's wages to be able to do it. So I don't have an obvious answer in terms of what wider support could be given other than financial at the moment. But we're as a supplier to a lot of these industries, it's quite difficult. We rely on, you can imagine that the businesses that are suffering and all the job losses that you're seeing at travel firms and all these other global businesses, they're the kind of companies that employ us to provide catering for their Christmas party or staff conference and things. So we're some way down the food chain in that sense, I suppose. It's about supporting the wider economy, and that will trickle down to us as effectively selling a luxury product, I suppose.
Daniel, thank you very much. Thank you for all your questions. Councillor Smythe, I know your question, I think it has been sort of similarly sort of answered within Joe's and Daniel's sort of remarks. I think I want to use this as an opportunity to bring in Councillor Nicholson, but just before I do, I just want to remind everyone that we do have the second part of the session is designed to sort of understand the impact of COVID-19 on our residents, and we're very happy and proud to be joined by Melanie Rochford from Hackney Food Bank. We've got Jermaine Chapman and Shakila from the Hackney Young Futures Commission, which has been a lot of work around engaging young people's views. We've got a couple more people as well. But Councillor Nicholson, I want to come to you just before we sort of start this section. It'll be really good for you to maybe briefly sort of respond to maybe some of the challenges that you've heard from some of the businesses that we've heard from, and just in sort of very detail in terms of where this leaves our sort of economy now, and how, I know you've been in touch with us prior to this meeting around, this idea about inclusive rebuilding, because it's an important area for the Commission to look into about how we rebuild our economy and make sure that inclusivity is right at the sort of the core and heart of that. So if I could just come to you very briefly, and then we can give enough time to sort of give enough time for our members to ask. I also want to acknowledge as well that we're joined by Councillor Carol Williams, who's also the Cabinet Member for Skills and Employment, and I keep forgetting the last bit of your I'm sorry. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us as well, and feel free to jump in after Councillor Nicholson's points as well. So Councillor Nicholson, over to you.
Thanks, Mette. Thanks, Chair. And hopefully you're hearing me. I think the internet connection has been a bit dodgy today at this part of Hackney anyway. But look, I'll try and sort of be succinct about this, and just perhaps first off, if I may, Mette, just give you a quick kind of summary about the kind of headlines that the council has been kind of sort of producing over the course of the lockdown period. There's been about £100 million injected into the local economy that has been distributed by the council. It has gone off to large numbers of businesses in one form of grant or another, or in the form of rate reliefs, for example. Equally, the 350 commercial tenants, the businesses, that does not include tenants from the voluntary and community sectors who are actually commercial tenants of the council. The phase one of the rent deferral programme has obviously covered Q1's rent, and that has meant that those businesses are not obliged to pay Q1 rent. And there are conversations going on a one-to-one basis with those commercial tenants as to looking at what kind of arrangements that Q1 and indeed rental payments for Q2 are also either to be paid off or written off, either way. So those conversations are still ongoing. I think that I think it was Andrew who mentioned the discretionary business rates grant scheme. Look, I'm afraid I'm going to have to kind of put a bit of a dampener on this, and I think it's very important that we recognise it. Central government have given Hackney Council £3.4 million to allocate under this initiative. The estimates are, when we look across those who could be entitled to apply for a grant, the estimates are that there are some 7,000 businesses of micro businesses as well as smaller businesses who would be entitled to make an application under the regime that is set. Now, it doesn't take too much of a genius to realise that if you just divvied that up equally amongst all 7,000, everyone gets £485 or thereabouts. Which really does not actually deal with the fundamental issue of cash flow and liquidity, of which we've been hearing from this evening from those colleagues in business. The issue here is about cash flow, liquidity, and the support that could be brought to bear to support through this period of time. There are a number of other kind of sort of criteria around the rather conflicted messaging that's coming from central government at the moment, and the responsibilities and the onus that are then placed on local government in trying to manage these confused messages. There is clearly a great need to reopen our economy, and I don't think anybody is ducking that one at all. Equally, we've got this competing set of messages around social distancing, about public well-being, and the containment of a biological virus. And we have to try and balance these two sort of criteria, these two competing kind of, and they are competing, unfortunately, demands. On that basis, a council, I think it is fair to say, and there are surely others on the call who could sort of give you far, far more kind of depth on this matter than I, but there is here a real challenge for a council. On the one hand, it is having to manage and deal with vulnerable residents, those who are shielded at the moment, and on the other hand, to kind of bring forward a phased reopening of our economy and do that in the safest possible way, not just for residents, but for customers and indeed for those of us who are working in business ourselves. So there we have this sort of great, great challenge in front of us. And clearly the only way we can sort of start to resolve this challenge is by some quite close collaboration between public and private, between business and council. Over the course of the lockdown, those who have signed up to the Hackney Business Network have increased quite significantly. Prior to the lockdown, the figure, the membership figure to that channel were but 1,000. What has now gone and happened is that over 5,500 local businesses are now joined up to that Hackney Business Network. There is a conduit in place, Chair, and I think that's important to kind of recognise, where there is a connection, a dialogue and a relationship between council and between the business community. That relationship has expanded still further through all of the various activities that have gone about through that £100 million investment. Now, going forward, I think there were a number of comments that were made by various colleagues around, for example, the business discretionary grant scheme, and on that kind of property cross criteria. Andrew, I think you've mentioned you'd spoken to the Director of Finance about this, and I'll pick that up with him, obviously, sort of tomorrow, and see where that conversation might have got to, and then we can come back on those sorts of qualifying criteria. I think at this point, if I may, just sort of finish off with where we go next. What is it that we as a council could perhaps put on the table? What kind of partnership and relationship is it that we could forge to take forward a reopening, a fading of Hackney's. There is clearly a real need to build confidence out there. Confidence if you're a customer, that actually if you come to Hackney and you're working or you're coming as a consumer, then it's safe. And that you can feel reassured that everything here is well managed, it is safe to do so. Equally for businesses, it's about enabling where we can as a council, the period. That to me kind of really does capture the essence of dialogue. If we cannot be communicating with each other to be doing so, that is going to make that process extremely challenging. I would advocate the Hackney Business Network is a great channel through which to communicate through. There are those of us, of course, i.e. elected members, where our local businesses can make a direct beeline to, and those representations can be made through councillors themselves. When we look at the inclusive economy strategy and our administration chair, we've got a big problem coming up. And the problem is that we can only have an inclusive economy if we have an economy that is thriving and prospering. If our businesses, our business owners, those working in our businesses cannot have that thriving economy, then our inclusive economy ambitions are in jeopardy. And I think that we must just sort of spend a moment and just recognise that and see how it is that we can re-engineer the council and what it can offer in support to try and consolidate our business. If it's advocacy, if it is about investment of some description or another, then I would really welcome that conversation, because at the moment I think there are more questions than answers, and I don't think there is anything wrong in admitting that. And I think that there is now, in a new normal environment, that opportunity to create a greater sense of collaboration and dialogue to try and organise around what happens next through Q2, Q3 and into Q4. I think that call that came from government about a V-shaped kind of graph, if I can call it that, in terms of COVID hits, economic activity declines rapidly, and then equally as quickly it comes back up again, I fear is not actually going to happen. What will happen is a U-shaped recovery, and that U-shaped is going to be quite wide. That means that we're going to have to collaborate and work quite closely together to steer a steady course and make sure that Hackney can withstand some of these sort of buffeting that's going to come through as a result of this pandemic. Thanks a lot, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nicholson. I think it's really great to thank you for the way you sort of ended, because I think it leads us nicely to where we're heading. And I think, you know, like just before I bring in some of the members and some of the other panelists to speak, I think it's really important that we, you know, as you rightly say, our inclusive economy strategy is obviously in jeopardy because of, you know, the impact of COVID-19 on our economy. But I also feel like, and I'm sure that other councillors could agree with me as well, is I don't want us to fall into the trap of, you know, almost like using this as an excuse to sort of not do our bit. And that's not the council, for the council, by the way, but that's for our businesses and all the key stakeholders that need to make sure that we have an inclusive economy. So, you know, I think, you know, my hope is that we don't sort of just, you know, just throw all of the blame on COVID-19 and not sort of do our bit on what we need to do, and sort of just easily chuck the blame on COVID-19 and think that we can get away without putting sort of our local residents at the heart of growth. Before I do take questions, I am mindful of time, and we've got plenty of time, but it's just that I know Jermaine and Shakila, you know, I know Shakila is working, for example, and I know Jermaine has got other commitments as well. So I just really wanted to bring them in now. And I think that nicely ties into you as well, Councillor Nicholson, because it sort of relates to sort of your portfolio and also to Councillor Williams' portfolio around how young people feel about our economy and what they've been hearing. So Jermaine, we've got Jermaine Jackman and we've got Shakila Scarlett from the Hackney Young Futures Commission. I know you've both been doing plenty of question time events with young people and the Mayor of Hackney, and which I've been involved in as well. And you've been speaking to lots of young people, and I know you've obviously concluded your report as well. So if I could pass over to you, Jermaine, and maybe Shakila, you can go straight after. But just a couple of minutes on what you've been hearing from young people about what they're feeling now and also what they want going forward. And you're on mute, Jermaine.
There you go.
Thank you. I usually tell other people that they're on mute, so I'm glad I actually fell for it this time round. Shakila and I will do a little double act. Shakila, you there? Cool, wicked.
Yes, I am.
Wonderful.
Hello.
So
Hi,
we
everyone.
had a segment, one of the themes in our report called Inclusive Future. So we're working towards a future that is inclusive in terms of the economy, in terms of businesses, in terms of the community, and how young people can benefit from that economic growth. A lot of what, from my memory and from the conversations that I have had with young people, especially in relation to coronavirus, young people are really worried about the future employment and the implications COVID is going to have on work experience, training opportunities, internships, apprenticeships, and preparing them for the future world of work. So providing them with those 21st century skills. And alongside the implications to education, young people are like, okay, well, we know that coronavirus is going to cause mass disruption to a lot of businesses. In our recovery and in the economic growth, how can we benefit? And I use this same term today. It's a better normal, and instead of using the term a new normal, because a new normal, in terms of inclusive and regeneration and gentrification, young people and members of the community weren't a part of it. The old normal never worked for parts of the community. So how can we ensure that we work together to ensure that we have a better normal where it is inclusive and young people feel that they are not only a part of it, but they also can benefit from the economic growth to come? Shakila?
Yeah, so following on from that, we've been having, as Mete mentioned, we've been having conversations with young people called the Hackney's COVID Conversations, and we've basically been asking them like what's been going on with them and how they are and what issues they're currently experiencing. And there is a lot of uncertainty around mental health and the well-being of young people and their families in particular. Young children are fearful and do not always have the necessary support networks at home to reassure them in terms of like what's going to happen next. How do we go about making sure that there's a stable structure once things go back to what would be our new normal? Also, the fairness of the exam grading system once kids like that are in the higher end of education, so exam results, GCSEs, as well as the studying and working from home is difficult in terms of access to Wi-Fi and stuff. And a lot of young people are really concerned about the economy and job access and how we kind of challenge that going forward in a post-COVID society. And it's been quite interesting to hear what young people are saying in terms of the simple question is, what will the new normal look like for young people? There isn't an answer. We don't have the answers yet, and I'm sure no one else does, but it's definitely something that needs to be on the minds of everyone. And coming here to kind of speak about our report that has just been presented to LPG, as well as going to be presented at other places fully in the coming weeks, and making sure that young voices are included. It's not that I feel like from our COVID conversations, a lot of young people feel like they're the forgotten sort of group of people. We've seen businesses get loads of support in terms of financial, as well as making sure that there are things in place so the economy can get restarted. But we've also seen adults, local councils, in particular Hackney as well, given more discretionary payments to help adults and stuff. So really just looking at how do we support our young people. In terms of our recommendations, though, on inclusive futures, it would be great if we can bring to your attention what those are, and really just go through them and kind of get comments or questions from the commission panel here. Jermaine, do you have those up, or should I bring them?
Yeah, I don't know if they've had sight of it just yet, but Inclusive Futures more or less speaks about how we create a more equal and inclusive borough. So we're looking at regeneration and making sure that we have young people's voices involved in that. We're talking about recruiting young advisors and treating them as experts in terms of planning and design, and involving young people in the planning approaches to improve social integration. But there's one key thing that I think that relates to this commission, and that's the nighttime economy. And Shakila earlier said that we don't think that no one here has the answers, but we have a recommendation that can potentially point us in the right direction. And that's ensuring, and this is our ask. Our ask is that Hackney supports young people and the nighttime economy by ensuring inclusive and fair access, by developing local inclusion pilots to increase the visibility and participation of young people to access the nighttime economy. And the reason why that one was a recommendation was because young people growing up in Hackney is embedded in their DNA. When they're born and brought up, they are proud to come from Hackney. They wear it as a badge of honor. And when they go out at night, they say to us that they don't go out in Shoreditch or Dalston. They don't go out into those hot spots that some of us might identify as the places, the go-to places to go to in Hackney during the nighttime. They're talking about, we want diversity in terms of what's on offer in relation to the nighttime economy. They're talking about how can we also benefit from the nighttime economy and the opportunities. And I think that there's also a conversation that needs to be had about coronavirus and obviously its devastating impact on businesses, but also what opportunities has COVID sort of shed light on that young people can benefit from. So when we see the closing down of businesses, and while those are heartbreaking images to look at, young people can maybe take in those shop fronts as entrepreneurs. I remember only 2 weeks ago, I went around the corner into Clapton to get rum punch from a young man who started a little rum punch business during lockdown. So young people are using this time to think creatively on how they can generate income. And it's about how do we connect that to some of the opportunities that are now cropping its head.
Great, thank you so much, Jermaine and Shakila. I think I can speak on behalf of the Walker Commission when I think it's been very refreshing sort of hearing your views, and thank you for all your hard work in sort of engaging with young people's views. Firsthand sort of witnessed that. I just realised I've been speaking to Tim offline, and we've got lots of speakers to get through, and I want to leave a real chunk for questions at the end, because I don't want it to sort of just be, we're cutting it too short. So Councillor Nicholson, I know you're online, but if it's okay with you, what I want to do is actually just move on with the agenda. We'll come back to you for the questions, and I think in many ways that will help support you as well, because it would just be good for you to hear from the lots of different perspectives that are coming out. Jermaine, Shakila, I think I know that you may have to go, which is why we brought you on earlier. Thank you so much for your time today. I think from our commission's perspective, would certainly like to work with you both on the nighttime economy agenda, because as you say, Jermaine, as a young person growing up in Hackney as well, I've many times witnessed going out in Shoreditch and not being allowed to go in for no apparent reason, which we all know why the reason is. It would be really good to speak to you about that aspect, but it will also be good to speak to you about how we can, as both commissions, work together about how, on this question about rebuilding our economy, but making sure that it works for the young people of Hackney. So both hands, I and Tim will be in touch with you following the meeting. So thank you so much. Have a lovely evening. And without further ado, I want to introduce Melanie Rochford from the Hackney Food Bank. Sorry, Shakila, did you want to say something quickly?
No, I was just going to say thanks, and I think it's really important that everyone involved in this definitely does dip into what the Commission is going to be doing going forward, simply because it's a community effort. We can't do it by ourselves, the councillors can't do it by themselves, and the community can't do it by themselves, so just making sure that everyone else is involved in the effort going forward.
For sure, yeah. And, it's very difficult for us to talk too much in detail over here because of the thing, but I know that our commission will be working with you to specifically engage in the views of young people as well in Hackney. So have a great evening, and thank you so much again for all your time. We're joined by Melanie from Hackney Food Bank. Again, I'm trying to speak on behalf of all the commission to say thank you for all your efforts on everything you've been doing during this very difficult time. You've been amazing, and you've helped support thousands of families, and it'd be great to hear from you a bit about how you feel those families and people have been affected. Because I know we've been speaking, Melanie, offline, and you've been talking to them about how this isn't just sort of the ordinary sort of everyday people who come to food banks. It's to sort of widen faith, and in many ways it sort of worried you. So it'd be great to hear from you a bit about the questions that we've sent to you.
Thank you, Chair. Lots has happened in the last, nearly 3 months now. Big thank you to Hackney Council for supporting us as well. Sonia Khan in particular, and other people in the background. Also Councillor Williams and Councillor Billington. I know they've been involved in really rallying their local communities to get behind the need that has quite simply ballooned to even more of a balloon than it was before. We thought it was already really hard to deal with pre-COVID-19, and then we saw just how ridiculous the levels could get. So just to give you an idea, our quietest centres, we've got 5 centres across the borough. They've doubled. They've seen the numbers coming to them each week doubling. And meanwhile, the busiest centres have seen a tripling in the numbers. So we're talking about busiest centre now is seeing in a 2 to 2.5 hour slot 120 people, and that's 120 people queuing with a voucher. So that doesn't take into consideration the size of the household they have to actually feed when they get home. So we're talking children, elderly people, various dependents. It's been quite shocking, but the community support has been brilliant. There's been a lot of people, particularly in Hackney, being working as freelancers or being furloughed themselves, younger people who weren't at risk, who were able to step in to provide volunteer support, while our largely older volunteer backbone group of people who we always used to rely on had to step away and shield. So just to give you an idea, April, we fed over 1,000, just over 1,000 people. And 349 of those were children. The numbers still are increasing. So we're not seeing a plateauing yet. And we're quite concerned that we're bracing ourselves for a long-term issue, and we can't hold it together just on our own. We are a small team. We do try wherever possible to collaborate with businesses for financial support and donations and volunteer support, other charity organisations to provide that wider umbrella kind of support, whether it's debt advice, cooking on a budget advice, National Energy Action for fuel poverty advice. They've been brilliant. Mind, they contact our clients to provide not mental health support, but actually welfare entitlement support, just to make sure that they are optimizing their full entitlement to benefits. There's so much more we need to be doing. But if I take it back to what this group's about and how perhaps the council and the councillors could support, for now, just sheer logistics, I think that the volumes of food that we are handing out each week are the Florence Bennett Centre, which we rent from the council, isn't enough on its own. The storage space at the multi-storey car park in Here East has been an absolute lifeline for us. Longer term, my concern is how can we carry on like that, especially in the colder months. Our food items, they're non-perishables on the whole, but they're going to start freezing if they're in a car park. So we do need to think about long term, are there any council premises that we could make use of somewhere elsewhere in the borough that could support the effort? Because we won't be able to just use the Florence Bennett Centre with its warehouse plus some access storage spaces that we rent each month. So that's probably the main ask, as well as a business parking permit. That would be amazing, because we are raising money for a new van in order to deal with the massive quantities we're now having to deliver to each centre, and also because in October we have to be ULEZ compliant, and if we don't change our van by then, we will be having to pay, understandably, a daily charge of £100 just for using a dirty van, which is very unreliable. So those are my key asks. Then, just as an aside, having heard what Shakila and Jermaine were saying, I know some businesses have approached us saying, we've had to close down for now, but we have premises and we're happy to let them be used for free. So I think Jermaine mentioned something about younger people, opportunities that might be presenting themselves at this time. Well, there might be an opportunity for some of them, if they have an entrepreneurial spirit, to make use of spaces that are actually lying dormant at the moment, but with owners or renters who see there's an opportunity at least to let someone else use them for free.
That's great. Thank you so much, Tony. And very, very, very much agree with your last point there. Are you okay to stick around a bit more longer?
Yeah, I have a teenager who's quite hungry, but knows where the oven is. He can take the pizza out. It's okay.
Great, thank you, because I'm sure there'll be commission members who will have lots of questions for you too. We're also joined by Hannah and Hardeep as well. So Hannah and Hardeep, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Okay, got Hannah. So yeah, Hannah, yeah, great. And Hardeep, can you hear me? Okay, maybe not. Maybe if Hardeep connects, then we can go back to Hardeep. But Hannah, yeah, thank you so much for your. Oh, you can hear me, Hardeep. Great. So Hannah and Hardeep, I guess maybe Hannah, we'll start with you. Thank you so much for your time this evening. You know, I know Tim sort of spoke to you sort of prior to the meeting and put forward some questions on how you can on sort of providing an account to the commission member. So it'd be great to hear from you a bit about how you feel like COVID-19 has impacted on our residents. And you?
Yeah, so I mainly had a question, but kind of in terms of personal account. I definitely kind of related to what Jermaine was saying, because in terms of job opportunities, obviously they've been quite sparse. So I've mainly at the moment, but in terms of someone who was before my recent role working from home, and now doesn't have much space at my house. I'm also thinking of residents that, you know, live in like tower blocks and also crowded accommodation, and have probably it's probably been like detrimental in terms of their mental health, probably been quite detrimental to them, lockdown, having to be in cooped up in a small space for a long period of time. And I feel like places like local libraries and stuff are quite a good resource for people like myself who don't necessarily have the space to work from home or don't have much space at home in terms of in general. So I was wondering what the plan was in terms of reopening those eventually. So yeah, that's that. So it's a bit of a place.
Sure. And Hannah, can I just follow up on that point? Because I know you're obviously been looking for jobs during sort of this period, and correct me if I'm wrong. And I just wanted to get an understanding, just very briefly, on how this whole, you know, everything that's happening now in COVID-19 has impacted your ability to look for jobs.
Yeah. So I'm mainly interested in the PR/communications sector. So what's kind of happened on that front, even from larger companies to smaller ones, most have paused their hiring process. So although there will be jobs up or posted on job boards like LinkedIn, they're kind of what they call phantom posts, in terms of you go on them and actually they're not really looking to hire anyway. So you've kind of wasted your time applying. And I've talked to a few recruiters and they've kind of said, yeah, currently the industry is suffering a tiny bit. So I've kind of just been encouraged to be proactive and reach out to companies, but most of them are kind of saying the same thing in terms of, we're not really hiring at the moment and we might consider you, or you should like email us back, because most of them aren't exactly certain when things will go back to normal, so they can't really say, "Oh, get back to us at X point in time," which is quite difficult.
Yeah, thank you very much for, and I'm sure if you have questions as well, we can definitely sort of field them to the right people. And thank you again. Hopefully, and all goes well. Hadib, I understand that your microphone is not working. If you have anything additional that you'd like to say or any question, feel free to write it in the chat box, and we'll definitely pick that up. So I guess we're at the point now where we've heard from all of our speakers, and it's been we've had so many speakers, so thank you all so much for your time. But I guess what I wanted to use this opportunity was really to give an opportunity to Sonia and to Simone, if it's possible, to give a brief response to some of the things that you've been hearing. And if I can ask you to be maybe not, I mean, obviously not too brief to the point where you can't get into any detail, because we want to hear that. But, give us enough time for questions. So if I can ask you maybe to sort of, Tim, how long should we say? Just looking at the time. So 7 minutes we've got here.
Yeah,
Okay.
we should be okay until 1:45 or 10:10 if it's full swing.
If we can say 5 to 7 minutes, just so we can give enough time for questions, because I've got a lot of questions to sort of to follow up on as well. So Sonia and Simone, feel free to sort of maybe Sonia, do you want to kick off yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I will be brief. I suppose just it's probably worth sticking to principles. So as has been said, we just adopted an inclusive economy strategy late last year, and we were just sort of on the point of looking at how we drew all the strands together and started to deliver. I mean, obviously a lot of it is delivered through the what you call business as usual, employment or regeneration, but it was that what more, where's the stretch? And we were just at the point of starting on that when we went into lockdown. So, I mean, the first thing to say is I've been very moved by what I've heard, both the residents' perspectives and also the businesses, and it's brought to light some of what we'd identified. And sorry, we are still sort of formulating our views, but we shared our initial direction with members. So apologies that that's not sort of been shared publicly yet, but will be soon. So it's sort of really brought to light, I think, and illustrated some of our worst fears and concerns, but also I think where there might be some opportunities and some of the ideas. So I suppose just to stick to principles in terms of what we want to do next. I think the first thing to say is that there is the council's role over and above, as we move out of a firefighting mode into where we go next and we come out of lockdown. I think the first thing to say is the council does have a role in thinking about place shaping. So over and above the individual support that can be offered to businesses, I think we do have a role in thinking about the whole and thinking about if we can get that better. Jermaine said, if we can build back better, which is one of the principles, how you can actually try to harness some of the opportunities and address some of the threats. So I suppose the reason I say that is that we heard about the sort of way that some business, the sorts of businesses that have benefited, if you like, during this have been some of the larger businesses that are national supermarkets, obviously a lot of the delivery companies. And I suppose other countries have actually located the role for local businesses more in national strategies to actually dealing with the support that's needed. So that has been a case, and obviously nationally our government hasn't done that. There isn't a template approach, but I suppose what we can do now locally to actually think about how we invest in local businesses in the way we respond and the next step, whilst recognising that for some businesses furloughing is probably sort of the most likely, for the moment it has been the sort of thing that people have been sort of forced to do with so much uncertainty. So I suppose key things just to highlight just briefly, which are, somebody else said earlier, there's sort of still more questions than answers at the moment. The first thing is to think about our own role as employers. So obviously we need a local economy, as Councillor Nichols says, we need businesses, we need that business space. But in the meantime, where there are vulnerabilities for residents, and we have seen a huge increase in universal credit claims, and we're really worried about young people leaving school now, not sure about whether to go to university. There'll be apprenticeships, but not enough. So actually bringing together other public sector employers and looking at how we can really we're already starting to do this, that idea of them being anchor institutions there in the long term, and the bigger businesses that are in the same situation as well. So what we can do to harness those opportunities and maximise those for the benefit of people. And then there are sectors that, I suppose, understanding where there is the risk in the economy and where there is the growth, and some of the conversations that we've had already, what is it that could be done that could be about existing businesses taking advantage of those opportunities and repurposing and some creativity, and what our role might be, going back to that thing about place shaping. So, for example, this is a massive unknown, but thinking through scenarios where more people are spending money in Hackney, because we already have that very neighbourhood based business. We're not a dormitory borough. So with some energy and some creativity, can we think about what that would mean if more people are going to be working from home over a longer period of time, and are looking to opportunities to actually do more in their local area? And what does that mean for actually starting to envisage the way we can support and nurture where there are opportunities? Obviously, sort of moving on beyond the individual programs from government that have been about supporting businesses, it's the whole. And Councillor Nicholson talked about having a larger business base that have engaged with us, so working with them on that. But also, I just pay testament to the fact that a lot of businesses have been involved in the local effort, directly or indirectly. So there's that community spirit. And whilst that sounds soft and intangible, it's sort of where now we really understand businesses better, and how we can involve them more in the next phase of actually continuing to support our communities, because we're not coming out of people being vulnerable anytime soon. But in a way that actually thinks about the sort of role of businesses in that, and where there might be business opportunities. And then the final point to make is about the very different employment market that we're left with. So what our employment and skills priorities need to be. There clearly needs to be more of a focus on skills development, on retraining residents for the sorts of jobs and where there might be the opportunities now. In the short term, again, that looks like focusing on the public sector and what opportunities there are, but that's not sustainable in the long term. So it very much fits with the direction that the economy might take, but moving quite quickly, being quite sort of dynamic, working with skills providers in looking at where there might be opportunities. But around that, there are still a lot of unknowns, and I think it will only be as we come out of the lockdown and businesses start to open, and we understand the hit they're going to take, because they're not going to be able to operate at full capacity. So actually, I'm talking in principles and theories, partly because we do need to understand, and today's been really helpful to get that reality check from people as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Sonia. And Simone, is there anything that you would like to add to that, just very briefly? I'm just conscious of time because we're literally 1:45, and I want to make sure we get questions in.
No, thank you very much, but I'll leave you with Sonia's.
But Simone is the lead officer now. This is her work, her paper, and we'll be sort of, with some creative energy trying to take this forward. And obviously, key officers are Andrew Monk and Suzanne and Stephen Haynes as well.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Sonia, for that, and Simone for being on this. So I'm sure you'll have an opportunity to come in on any questions, and we look forward to working together with you. Commission members, Councillor Nicholson, are you still on the line? Maybe off. Okay, that's a missed opportunity for us. No worries. Okay, well, let me just turn to the commission members. Any of you have any questions for any of the panelists or for what you heard? Councillor Palace, I've got you.
Yeah, a question for Sonia. One of the things that you kind of raised at the end of the document, which you provided, is this risk about, you know, kind of move to 0-hour contracts, much, you know, more precarious kind of amplifying of the situation that was already kind of existing in the employment sector in large respects, but could be massively exacerbated as we come out of out of lockdown in whatever shape or form that takes. And I was just wondering whether procurement and council procurement, whether you kind of see a role for that in trying to kind of engage with businesses as we kind of come out of lockdown, in trying to stabilize in many respects, or trying to encourage certain kind of employers from not necessarily going down that pathway, though it is obviously very, very difficult. So I was just wondering whether there may be a role for kind of council procurement as we transition kind of out of a lockdown, though we obviously may go back into one depending on whether there's a second wave.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Palace. Sonia, do you want to go ahead and answer that question?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so along with the inclusive economy strategy, we did adopt a toolkit for businesses, and obviously now has not been the time to start to work through that when businesses are sort of struggling to make sense of this. But I think very much that principle of actually supporting and encouraging businesses to continue to adopt those principles is going to be part of the idea of building back, you know, better, as opposed to sort of, as you say, going backwards. I know that's not easy for businesses. I'm not suggesting it is, but I suppose it's how you can, as you say, draw on the council's leverage, and where we've got business opportunities coming through, or where businesses are in accommodation, to sort of have conversations about what might be possible. Because I suppose it's about trying to get to a place where we've got a sustainable economy, and recognising it's going to take a shrink and hit. So having a conversation about the extent to which having having an employer base that is permanent, as opposed to 0-hour contracts, helps with that, and helps with the business in the long term. But I appreciate that we need to do that really sensitively. So you're quite right to draw on those levers, and I just wanted to flag that toolkit again and say that is going to give us a framework for having that conversation. The same applies to green. Melanie talked about you needing to move to a different sort of transportation with ULEZ, and I suppose the same applies to wanting to reach out to businesses and see how we can still look at carbon emissions reduction, and so the conversation I was having with you all about climate emergency. So sort of similar, just trying to avoid the risk that everything goes to a sort of worst case scenario. But I appreciate that's not an easy thing to say. I think it comes back to our role as a council in being more than a sort of having individual relationships, more than a regulatory service with businesses, and trying to bring those conversations together.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure which order I saw it in, but I'm going to go with Councillor Smythe and then Councillor Race.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I agree with an awful lot that you've said there, particularly about just around opportunity, because obviously with a kind of a local authority with an eye on the Green New Deal, we're looking at housing, transport, energy use, food production, employment, the way we live and work. But what I'd like to just ask you to comment on a couple of these sentences, which I'm going to read out from a report I've got next to me, in terms of constraints that the council is facing. So we're facing, obviously, funding constraints. So we know we need investment. I think Germany have just put £130 billion into the Green New Deal as a way of stimulating the economy. And we realise that if we're going to go down the direction of a new fork in the road, which we will have to go, that's how I kind of see this. This is another road that we have to take. So the sentences are: funding constraints imposed by the structure of and its equivalents where appropriate, restrictions on the capacity of devolved governments to vary taxation rates, limited borrowing powers for local authorities, which are constrained by prudential borrowing rules. Is there anything we can do about this to lobby for more funding from government? The limited reserves, what are our reserves like at the moment? Are they flat? Are they medium? Where are they? And just general restrictions and how we could look at those restrictions to basically increase our funding as a local authority is the question.
Thank you, Councillor Sonia. Sorry, just before you come in, can I just take Councillor Race's question as well, please?
Thanks, Chair. It was going to be a question for a couple of questions for Guy, actually. So Sonia, if you can answer them, then please do, but don't feel bound by them. But I wondered about what you thought if you could choose the sort of the biggest risk to the Hackney economy as a result of COVID. What would you say it is, and what, in your view, do we need to do to try and mitigate that risk to the local economy?
Question. Councillors, do I have any other questions? If I can't see your hand, can you just please type in the chat box and I'll come to you. Yeah, so my question was just really to pick up on Councillor Race's question as well. I think it's a shame that Councillor Nicholson had to leave. I think that's partly my fault for not sort of following the time because he had to leave earlier. I wasn't aware of that, but I'm sure we can get another opportunity to speak with him as well. And I've got a message from Councillor Carol Williams as well. He said he's happy to come on the question about employment and skills as she leads on that. So what we'll do is, Sonia, if you can answer questions to Councillor Race and Councillor Smythe, and then what I'll do is I'll bring in Councillor Williams at the end, and then we can just wrap up.
So, I mean, those are questions really, I think, for the Director of Finance. I don't feel confident responding to them, and they're partly questions for the Mayor in terms of public affairs. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to decline to answer those because I'll respond to them extremely in an incompetent way. That's okay. But I'd suggest that perhaps Tim notes that and you relay those questions to the right place. Is that okay?
And on the question about Councillor Race's question about
I mean, what I would say is that we will obviously work on where there are appropriate lobbying points, but again, I think that those questions are to do with the council's finances, and there are people spending a lot of time working on that, and would be better placed to respond to that. In terms of Councillor Race's point, I think the biggest risk is that we've heard from the hospitality industry, so we have. We are reliant on a hospitality industry, not just for jobs, but also for the vibrancy. I've been a Dalston resident for the last 20 years. I've seen the way that Dalston's changed. You know, we are reliant on the place shaping aspect of that. London is also reliant on that service economy. So we can't just think about Hackney's economy. We have to think about London as a whole. And the risk is that we open up after lockdown, and the businesses like the ones we've heard from find that it's difficult to catch up because they've got into debt, or because furlough ends, or because people are not confident to come back, or people don't have the sort of budgets to come back. Now, the optimistic side of me thinks, let's think about the idea of 20-minute neighbourhoods, 15, you know, the idea that we spend more in our local area, and Hackney is resilient in that respect, that it's not a dormitory a borough, so it has that potential. But yeah, I think that uncertainty around that key part of our economy, which has shaped so much as well of what Hackney is about, is key. I think Jermaine's point though about whether there is an opportunity there to get some young people, you know, to think about entrepreneurship and perhaps think about where there might be opportunities to get young people more involved directly, where there is so much potential and talent into an aspiration around the hospitality young people. So I suppose, yeah, trying to knit those things together again.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. And Councillor Williams, do you have any comments that you might take? Don't feel pressure to. I know you've sort of come into this meeting to observe as well, but if you've got any sort of any response that you would like to make, we're very short on time, so if you just want to sort of keep that brief, yeah.
Yeah, just in terms of the finance, yes, there's a lot of discussions going on. As Sonia says, there are other cabinet members we can ask those questions to. Know from the cabinet meeting, council meeting, that we have an incredibly large funding gap as a response of the council responding to the coronavirus pandemic. And our asks of government are varied and very, very broad indeed. You'll know that they have rowed back on their commitment to cover costs for local government. And so I think that, without getting overly political as a politician, there are a lot of asks that we can go back to the government with on funding local councils across the country, because there has been a massive response. There have been huge amounts of resources. Hackney has a very good reputation of looking at after our financial resources and planning and preparing for unknown events in the future. There is not an awful lot that reserves could do to plan for the scale of response that we've had to put into the coronavirus pandemic. Yeah, there are some asks, particularly around how the government fund all local authorities for the work that we have done, and the support that's been given by community and voluntary sector groups, because we really couldn't have made that response without them. But the details of which I'm sure Ian Williams and Councillor Renison would be more than happy to respond to.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I really appreciate your time and for coming to this meeting as well. I do want to finish the meeting sharp at 9 p.m. because I know a lot of you've got commitments. I think it's a shame, obviously, we couldn't get, partly it was my fault, we didn't get enough time to ask Councillor Nicholson some follow-up questions in relation to a specific area. But I think what would be really good to do as a commission is to, the whole point of this meeting anyway was a listening exercise for us as commission members to really understand what some of the biggest challenges that both residents are facing, but also in terms of businesses as well. We were meant to have a florist who was meant to join us, but I think they've had a bit of problem in terms of connecting. But we will sort of listen to the views of some of our high street sort of retailers as well, and understand how they've been impacted to make sure that we're sort of advocating on their behalf. But yeah, so Tim, unless there's anything else, I just wanted to sort of take this opportunity to thank you all. I think what we're going to be doing as a commission now is be looking at a wider review around how the impact of COVID-19 has impacted our local economy, and this big piece about rebuilding our economy. And what would be really good to do, I think, is, and as following this meeting, I think we'll write a letter to the cabinet and senior officers around picking up on some of those suggestions around. Picking up on someone else's suggestions, someone just sent me a very funny message, Gilbert, and someone picking up on some of those messages around from Jermaine, for example, about how we can use our sort of spaces and what we can be doing to sort of better connect, people like Joe and people from different industries to make sure that there's some sort of collaboration going on. So I'm sure that we'll be in touch. But thank you so much for all your time, and I will be ending the meeting now. And hope to be connecting with you all very soon. Thank you.